There was no blood in that room, but it changed a child forever. Are you signing this or not? The officer didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. There's no reward for being stubborn, son. There are rooms that never see blood, but leave a stain deeper than bruises. The interrogation room in Irving, Texas, was one of those. It wasn't the air conditioning that made it cold. It was the stillness, unnatural, unwelcoming, like time itself had been told to wait outside. 15-year-old Eli Ramirez sat stiffly on a steel chair with one leg shorter than the rest. His oversized hoodie kept slipping over his hands. His backpack lay spilled on the floor, its contents scattered. A pencil case, a battered spiral notebook, and a worn-out comic book about the solar system, still marked with the library's checkout label. Across the table sat Officer Trent Maddox. His uniform was pressed sharp, his face carved from stone. No anger, no fatigue, and certainly no empathy, only that hollow stare, the kind that comes from doing the wrong thing so often, you forget what right ever looked like. "What's your full name?" Maddox asked. Eli Ramirez," the boy mumbled. The officer nodded but didn't write anything down. He simply slid a stack of papers across the table. Voluntary confession, charge, vehicle theft. The words shouted louder than Maddox's voice ever could. I didn't steal anything," Eli whispered. "I didn't ask what you did," Maddox replied, eyes unmoving. "I asked whether you want your mama to lose sleep for the next few years. Or not." Eli's lips parted, but no words came. His hands clutched at nothing. His voice cracked. "Can I call my mom? Please?" "In a bit. First, sign." Grown-ups talk a lot about rights, but in rooms like this, rights don't speak. Fear does. Eli didn't know he had the right to remain silent. Didn't know that a child under 16 isn't supposed to be questioned alone. Didn't know that this interrogation was already wrong the moment it began. What he did know was this. His father was out of work. His mother owed money for medication, and Officer Maddox had a badge. So Eli obeyed. The officer laid a cheap blue pen on the table. Eli picked it up. His hand trembled so badly he could barely keep it on the line. The letters ELIR scratched their way onto the page, each curve like a tightening string around his chest. "Good," Maddox said, standing. "That's done." He didn't look back. Lucia arrived 4 hours later, still in her apron, flour on her palms. They told her, "Your son confessed. The quick hearing's tomorrow." It's routine. And it was. No private attorney, no cross-examination, no questions. Just a man in a black robe, sitting behind a bench. Judge Simmons. He flipped through the file like sorting delivery forms. Guilty plea confirmed. Sentencing per statute. One bang of the gavel. One name rubber-stamped offender. And just like that, a childhood was folded into 4 gray walls, inside a correctional facility where Eli Ramirez would never again look at the stars the same way. He didn't lose his innocence in the streets. He lost it in a quiet room, under fluorescent lights, where no one was yelling, but everyone had already decided he was guilty. Eli's house sat at the very end of the row, a tin-roofed, weather-worn place with sun-faded yellow paint and patches of clear plastic nailed over holes that couldn't be fixed any other way. People around town called that stretch the Tamales Row, not because it smelled good, but because every morning a woman named Lucia Ramirez could be seen pushing a rickety cart through the streets, selling hot corn tamales stuffed with spicy meat and homemade hope. Lucia once dreamed of owning a small food stand, a real one, with a sign and a stove, and a place where people could sit and feel warm. But that dream folded in on itself the day her husband, Javier, broke his back on a downtown construction site. They called it self-inflicted. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no compensation, no insurance, just a slip of paper with a cold phrase at the top. "No liability admitted." And a message from the site manager, said casually, like passing along the weather. "You want to sue? Go ahead. Just make sure your work history's clean." Lucia came home, folded the documents into a bag she never opened again. And from that day on, no one in the Ramirez household ever said the word lawsuit again. Eli was their only child. He had bright brown eyes and a quiet fascination with stars. Every time his mother finished her morning rounds, if she had 2 spare coins left over, Eli would ask, "Can I go to the used bookstore? The one near the library?" He loved books about astronomy, galaxies, nebulae, other worlds where people might be treated better. "I want to work at NASA," he once whispered to his mother while helping her peel corn husks in their small kitchen. Lucia smiled, gently rested her hand on his head. "But you've never even been on a plane," Eli grinned. "Then I'll build one." And for a little while, that tiny kitchen glowed with dreams bigger than its peeling walls could hold. But just outside the door, the world was dimmer, a place where dreams like Eli's didn't always survive the weather. Javier Ramirez, Eli's father, never set out to be a troublemaker. He was simply doing what people told him to do. Fired after a workplace injury? Don't just accept it. File a claim. Fight for your rights. So he did. After falling from the third-story scaffolding, Javier spent 17 days in a hospital bed. His lower back was damaged beyond repair. He could no longer lift, bend, or carry. And without that, he couldn't go back to the only kind of work he'd ever known. The company, known for resolving things in-house, shrugged off the injury. They said it was his own fault. Carelessness, not conditions. Javier filed a claim anyway. He filled out every page by hand, messy, uneven handwriting, because his fingers still trembled from surgery. And to make his case, he needed someone willing to speak up. Only one man said yes, a former police officer named Thomas Grigg, once a colleague of Officer Maddox. Grigg had been dismissed years earlier under procedural misconduct, a vague charge tied to a messy arrest. The details were never public. All anyone knew was that Grigg left quietly, carrying with him a few too many things he hadn't dared say aloud. Still, when Javier asked for help, Grigg didn't hesitate. He wrote a statement, confirmed that Javier had worked overtime without compensation, that he wasn't given safety gear, that he wasn't allowed breaks even when in visible pain. That letter didn't win the case, but it put a mark on the Ramirez family, the kind that doesn't show up in ink, but follows you like a shadow. They didn't call them troublemakers. They just called them difficult. And from that moment on, the quiet punishments began. Not like thunder, more like a long, slow rain that never really stopped. Lucia's application for medical assistance was delayed 4 times, each time citing missing documents, even though the files had been submitted, complete and stamped. In Flagstaff, some days slip by like dust in the wind, so ordinary they leave no trace. But there are nights that never leave you. That night was gentle. No rain, no wind, just the leftover heat of a long, sunburnt day still rising off the pavement like breath from warm stone. Lucia was in the kitchen, wrapping tamales for the morning market. Javier had gone to bed early, his labored breathing echoing faintly from the back room. And Eli, as he did every Friday night, was still at the library. He pedaled home slowly, his backpack snug against his shoulders. Inside were a few books on astronomy, some notes, and his latest drawing, a solar system of his own making. 2 ringed planets labeled J and L for Javier and Lucia. Eli always came home on time, always cautious. He lowered his head when passing officers, didn't linger where he wasn't needed, because in this town people remembered his name, and not kindly. 8 blocks away, near a dimly lit shopping plaza, a man reported his car stolen. An old model, no witnesses, no security cameras. The police logged the report, bare bones. At 9:07 p.m., Officer Trent Maddox received the dispatch. On any other day, it might have gone unnoticed. But it was the end of the month, and Maddox had numbers to hit. Superiors were watching. Quotas were due. "Don't let that youth crime column come up blank again this month, Trent," read the last email from his captain, still starred in his inbox. Maddox didn't need much, just one name, one neat little file to mark juvenile apprehension, case closed. He opened a blank report and typed, "Anonymous source describes suspect as a thin, curly-haired teen of Hispanic descent, known to frequent the area." Generic enough to match any kid within 5 miles. But Maddox already had someone in mind. 9:24 p.m. Eli turned the final corner before home. The street lamp above flickered. He gripped the handlebars tighter. Behind him, a white SUV skidded to a stop. Headlights swept across the pavement. Red, blue, yellow, all flashing. "Stop!" Startled, Eli slammed the brakes. His bike tilted sideways. His backpack slid off and thudded onto the curb. Maddox stepped out slowly, one hand resting on his belt, grazing his holster like it was muscle memory. "Name?" "Eli. Eli Ramirez." "Where you headed?" "Home. From the library." Maddox glanced at the fallen backpack. Didn't open it. Didn't ask. He nodded once, motioned for Eli to step toward the curb. "You hear about a car stolen from the plaza tonight?" "No, sir." "You're a Ramirez. That's enough." They didn't handcuff him, but the cruiser door locked as it shut. Eli stared out the blurred window, streetlights painting shaky patterns on his reflection. A faint outline of himself, flickering like a dream unraveling too fast to catch. At the station, Maddox didn't bother with formality. No call to his mother, no search of the backpack, no request for surveillance, because there was none. All he needed was a name that had already been tagged. "You're a suspect in a vehicle theft." "But I don't know how to drive." Maddox didn't reply. He opened a drawer, pulled out a thick folder, and clipped a few pages together. "Confess, it's quicker this way." That night, the missing car was never found. No witness came forward. No camera captured anything. But in the end-of-month report, a single line appeared. "Suspect identified. Minor. File recorded. Case closed." Lucia arrived at the police station a little after 11 p.m. She had just finished wrapping the first batch of tamales for tomorrow's market. Her hands were still dusted with cornmeal when the landline rang. A sound no family wants to hear after dark. "Your son is being held for questioning." "Why?" "Suspicion of auto theft." "My son doesn't even know how to drive." "Ma'am, he's already confessed." Lucia ran out the door in a panic. Her plastic sandals slapped the pavement with every step. She didn't stop to comb her hair or change her shirt, just threw on a thin house coat and prayed she was wrong. At the station, the door to the interrogation room was already closed. A young officer stepped in front of her, voice drained, mechanical. "They're finishing paperwork." "Don't cause a scene. There's nothing you can do." Lucia wanted to scream. But where exactly does a mother aim her scream when the system is built to absorb silence? Inside, Eli had already signed 3 pages of confession, filled with legal terms he didn't understand. Maddox was still there, arms folded, eyes empty, like a man who believed his work was done, and the rest was just paperwork. Eli sat still, hugging his backpack, the one nobody ever bothered to open. Inside were his school books, a box of colored pencils, and a drawing of a planet he never got to finish. The next morning, 8:45 a.m., Lucia wore her oldest white blouse and carried every document she owned. Eli's report cards, a certificate from the library, receipts for school supplies. He didn't do anything wrong. He's just a kid. The Flagstaff courthouse stood right behind the town's used bookstore, the same one where Eli used to check out books about Saturn. The courtroom was small, plastic chairs, wood paneling that peeled in places. Presiding was Judge Howard Simmons, a man who'd worn the robe for over 2 decades and, in that time, had never once overturned a police confession. He flipped through Eli's file with the efficiency of someone checking an invoice. This was what they called a simple hearing, nothing unusual. Eli stood quietly. No tears, no questions, no real understanding. He looked toward the back row where his mother sat, not allowed to speak because she wasn't part of the formal testimony. Beside him sat a tired man in a wrinkled shirt and a faded name badge that read, Public Defender. The lawyer had arrived 10 minutes before the hearing, glanced at the file once, never spoke to Eli. "The defendant has confessed," he said flatly. "No need for argument. The court may proceed." Judge Simmons nodded. He didn't look at Eli, didn't ask if he understood what was happening to him. Based on the signed confession and accompanying documentation, this court sentences Eli Ramirez to 12 months at the Juvenile Rehabilitation Center. A single knock of the gavel. No applause, no objections. Just another case, closed in record time. The public defender was already walking out the door, muttering into his phone, "All done. I'll make the bakery before they close." Outside the courthouse, Lucia sat on the bottom step. She held Eli's backpack to her chest. Her hands trembled, not from the cold, but because inside that bag was everything her son had carried from the library. The astronomy book lay open to a satellite photo of Mars. In the corner of the page, Eli had scribbled in pencil, "If I had a planet, I'd name it Lucia." And on that morning, in a tired town where justice had long since run dry, the name Ramirez was added to a criminal record in under 15 minutes. No debate, no cross-examination, no second chances. Just a child, swallowed whole by a machine he was never meant to understand. 2 days after the hearing, Lucia returned to the market as usual. She pulled the old cart from the shed, its wheels wobbling on the sidewalk. The tamales stayed warm under thick towels. A small gas stove rattled beside them. She placed each box on the wooden shelf and wiped off her hand-painted sign. "Hot tamales, $2 a box." The smell was still the same, but the street seemed to have lost its nose. People passed. No one stopped. Some turned their faces. Others crossed the street, like her presence had become something to avoid, not acknowledge. Lucia kept smiling. "Fresh this morning, still warm," she called gently. No one replied. By mid-morning, a city official approached. He wore a vest and carried a clipboard with a plastic name badge clipped to the front. "Miss Lucia Ramirez?" "Yes, we've received complaints. Your regular presence here is affecting the neighborhood image. We ask that you refrain from vending for a few days." Lucia stood still, her hands tightening around the cart's handle. She wanted to ask, "Who complained?" But the question stuck in her throat, because she already knew. No one wanted to be associated with a family whose child had a record, even if that record was sealed with a silent confession in a courtroom that barely took 15 minutes. At school, Eli's old classroom still lit up every Monday morning. The seat he once filled, third from the window, sat empty. The homeroom teacher walked past it like passing a glitch in the system. No one mentioned it. No one asked. Only one boy, Marcus, Eli's desk partner, once dared to whisper, "Where is he?" The teacher glanced briefly, then looked away. "Not your concern." That night, Marcus pulled out the solar system drawing he and Eli had made, each planet labeled with a classmate's name. He crumpled it and tossed it into the trash behind the school. Not because he hated Eli, but because he didn't want to be seen as the kid who was friends with the one who got arrested. Back at House 38, Lucia began to notice the changes. Flyers that used to be slipped into her door stopped coming. Utility bills arrived late, and every time she called a public service office, the voice on the other end was robotic. "Your records are under review. Please hold." Neighbors who once nodded politely at sunrise now looked down and walked past. That evening, while cleaning out the bins behind her kitchen, Lucia noticed a folded slip of paper wedged under the trash lid. Cream-colored, inked in blue, feminine handwriting. "I know what you're feeling. My brother was framed by Maddox back in 2017. We never spoke out. I'm sorry." There was no name. Just one final line, bolded in ink. "We are not wrong. We just live where the wrong people have power." Lucia held the note for a long time. She didn't cry. She simply sat down back against the brick wall behind her house, where Javier had once nailed a little wooden plaque carved with the word La Esperanza, hope. The plaque had faded, but the word was still there. Eli's story, the one the town had quietly erased, didn't return with protest signs or televised outrage. It came back with a click. 4 weeks after the sentencing, the Arizona Judicial Oversight Office received a series of anonymous complaints, all pointing toward the Flagstaff Police Department, all naming the same officer, Trent Maddox. The reports weren't complete. They had no signatures. But there was a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Most of the accused were minors. Most were youth of color. Most cases were rushed through court, and at least 6 had no attorney's signature on record. The documents were forwarded to the State Department of Justice for review. And from there, the file landed on a desk they trusted for integrity, but not for playing safe. Her name was Jasmine Crockett. Jasmine wasn't new to walking into rooms others avoided. She had once uncovered a forged police database used to detain immigrants. She'd served as deputy director of human rights investigations in New Mexico. And before all that, she was just a little girl, sitting on a courtroom bench, watching her father cry as he lost his pension over a missing signature. So when she arrived in Flagstaff that Tuesday morning, she came alone. No entourage, no agency car, just a worn suitcase, a personal laptop, and a memory full of silenced voices. Her office was on the second floor of the County Justice Building, directly below the archive room. For the first 3 days, Jasmine didn't ask questions. She didn't call press briefings. She didn't knock on doors. She simply read, file after file, date after date, statement after statement. And then, tucked inside a manila folder labeled Minors Closed Cases, she saw the name that made her fingers stop mid-turn. Ramirez Eli. She paused, brow furrowed. Born 2008. Sentenced 1 day after arrest. Notes: voluntary confession. No attorney requested. And no attorney's signature. She flipped through the attachments. No official audio. No forensic report. No scene investigation from the alleged auto theft. A child confessed to grand theft without a lawyer, without a parent, without anything. Jasmine whispered it to no one. This wasn't a file. It was a distress call, sealed inside a system built to forget. The next morning, Jasmine visited the one person who might know more than the paperwork let on. Denise Overton, a former court clerk who had quietly taken leave 6 months earlier, citing mental health. Denise wasn't surprised to see her. She sighed, opened a drawer in her old desk, and pulled out a black USB stick. A strip of masking tape labeled in blue pen, ER, off the record interrogation. Jasmine plugged it into her laptop. The recording was 7 minutes long, staticky, but clear enough to hear, "Sign it, or your mama loses the house. You want to see her collapse in the middle of the market?" Then a boy's voice, small, staggered, close to tears. "I'll sign. Please don't hurt my mom." Jasmine removed the headphones. Her eyes didn't flicker. They simply settled, with the calm resolve of someone who's heard too many stories like this and still refuses to let them fade. But this time she wasn't staying quiet. "I want every case Maddox has touched in the past 5 years." "That's hundreds," the records officer whispered. "Then we start with one." "Which name?" "Eli Ramirez." Around town, people started to whisper. "There's a new prosecutor, small woman but different." They didn't know her name, but they heard she wasn't afraid of Maddox, wasn't afraid of Simmons, and most of all, wasn't afraid of the truth. In law books, justice is a balanced scale. But in Flagstaff, it wasn't balanced. It was a marketplace scale, and the people behind it weren't weighing truth. They were weighing profit. Jasmine Crockett wasn't looking for evidence to dispute a single case. She was tracing the system that had created it, and quietly buried dozens of others just like it. The deeper she dug, the clearer it became. The Ramirez family hadn't been targeted because they'd done something wrong. They were targeted because they were convenient, fertile ground for growing power and harvesting reward. Judge Simmons wasn't just handing out sentences. He was the gatekeeper, the one every case passed through. On financial records, Jasmine found him listed as an honorary advisor for RYF, the nonprofit that ran the county's juvenile rehabilitation center. He didn't collect a salary, but every quarter, RYF gave him $12,000 in community support stipends, listed under things like legal outreach workshops, youth development, and educational speaking. All untaxed, all untraceable. What did Simmons get? A slush fund no one audited, a steady stream of accolades for efficient judicial processing, and a backdoor way to build political capital without getting his hands dirty. Every child sentenced quickly was a success metric. More convictions meant more funding for the rehabilitation model. Every time Simmons nodded from the bench, he wasn't just delivering justice. He was authorizing more money at the cost of another childhood no one had bothered to protect. The public defender wasn't evil, but he knew how to survive the system. For every juvenile who pleaded guilty and waived their right to appeal, he received an expedited case stipend, $850 per case, funded jointly by the local court and RYF. On paper, it was meant to minimize emotional distress by reducing court time for minors. But Jasmine knew better. Nothing shatters a child's sense of self more than being sentenced without anyone asking if they did it. Eli wasn't the first. In 5 years, this public defender had filed 0 appeals on behalf of minors, even in at least 19 cases with no legal counsel during interrogation, and 11 with signs of coercion. So what did he get? A guaranteed salary, quiet bonuses, and most importantly, job security, because he never made noise. As for Maddox, he didn't need to fake evidence. He'd built a system where suspicion alone was enough. According to internal police reports, Maddox consistently topped the charts in juvenile crime reduction. How? By arresting quickly, processing faster, and always having a file ready before month's end. Each quarter, he needed at least 3 cases to maintain his investigative efficiency. And suspects? They were easy to find. Neighborhoods where brown kids rode bikes in oversized hoodies, where nobody had private lawyers, where silence looked a lot like guilt. Every successful conviction landed him in internal newsletters as increasing control over high-risk zones. And that came with perks. Points toward promotion, a reputation for getting results. He didn't need to know if the kids were guilty. He just needed them to count. The Ramirez family? Perfect profile. A father with a history of friction with the courts, a quiet son, obedient, pliable, and no resources for legal defense. Maddox didn't need to pull a trigger to gain power. He just needed to make others disappear. Eli wasn't the first, but he was the first to have someone who refused to stay silent on his behalf. That night, Jasmine switched off her office light. Before leaving, she pinned a small note to the board above her desk. Not a legal citation, not a footnote, just a line in her own handwriting. This system doesn't need to collapse. It only needs someone to stop keeping it upright. And she had decided she would be that someone. The courtroom door creaked open. A thin sliver of light slipped in, sweeping across the dust-lined hallway. The air held the scent of old wood, stale coffee, and paper that had lived too long. It was all familiar, but this time something had changed. Eli stood at the threshold, motionless, as if the courtroom floor was frozen lake ice, and any wrong step might send him plunging. "I don't think I'm ready," he whispered, eyes locked on the empty benches. Jasmine Crockett didn't answer right away. She simply leaned forward until she stood level with him. Not above, not below, just beside. "This door once slammed shut on you," she said softly. "Today we open it again. But this time you walk in not as a file number, but as a human being." Eli swallowed hard, then stepped forward. Each footfall was quiet, but deliberate. The gallery wasn't full. No reporters, no crowd. But those who were present didn't need name tags to shift the weight of the room. Maddox sat center, suit stiff, tie crooked. His forehead glistened under the cold air vents. To his left, Simmons, stripped of his robe, eyes dull as ash. The public defender sat farther back, fingers clasped, staring at the floor like he hoped to disappear. And Jasmine stood before the bench, holding her only weapon, details that could not be denied. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize. She placed a thin file gently on the table in front of her. Confession document. No attorney signature, no parent present, no psychological evaluation. A confession taken at night by an armed adult from a hungry child who didn't understand what he was being accused of. She didn't point at Maddox. She didn't glare at Simmons. She let the numbers speak. 74 juvenile cases resolved in under 30 minutes, 89% with no appeals filed, 100% of defendants, children of color or first-generation immigrants. Then she switched on a small speaker. There was no slideshow, no dramatic music, just a voice dry and brutal. "Sign it or your mama loses the house. No lawyers coming, kid, it's late." A pause, then a breath, uneven, shaking. A child's voice, barely audible. "I'll sign, just don't hurt my mom." Silence, but not the kind that ends things, the kind that hangs in the air, heavier than any verdict ever spoken. Jasmine turned to the jury. "I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking you to imagine if it were your child. And when they said, 'I don't understand,' Someone replied, "You don't need to. Just sign." Today isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about lifting someone up. Someone who was buried simply for being born with the last name Ramirez. The public defender said nothing. The jury didn't need much time, because this time, truth didn't need anyone to believe it. It carried the scars to prove itself. The verdict was read by an older woman, voice low and sandpaper worn. We, the jury, find that Officer Trent Maddox willfully coerced a confession, used intimidation, bypassed protocol, and exploited his position to destroy the future of a minor. We find that the court-appointed defense counsel failed in his duty to represent his client and shall be suspended pending review. And Judge Howard Simmons, for violation of conflict of interest ethics, is hereby recommended for disciplinary investigation. There was no applause. There didn't need to be, just a single exhale from somewhere in the back. The kind of breath someone takes when, for the first time, they no longer have to tiptoe around the truth. Lucia sat near the wall, knees folded to the floor. Eli stood before the bench, not bowed but bent forward, as if to gather back the pieces of himself that had been scattered too long. After the trial, life in the Ramirez household quietly shifted back into orbit. Monday morning, the Flagstaff Library opened at 8 a.m. Eli arrived 10 minutes early, sitting still on the wooden bench out front. In his hands was an old astronomy book, the cover worn, pages yellowed at the edges. Page 47 still had a faint pencil underline. "There is no end if we keep searching." He turned the page. For the first time after days of humiliation, the writing was no longer blurred by tears. Across town, in the eastern corner of the market, a small pushcart stood once again. Lucia wiped the wooden sign with her sleeve, then rewrote the same words she'd written 100 times before. "Hot tamales, $2. But this time, no one told her to leave. No one turned away. And somewhere in the quiet rustle of book pages, in the hush of early shoppers, in the soft murmur of conversations that no longer needed to shout, people began to understand. This wasn't just Eli's story. It was about every child who'd ever been told to stay silent because someone decided their voice wasn't worth hearing. Justice doesn't begin in a courtroom. It begins the moment someone listens, even if the voice is small, trembling, and whispers, "I didn't do anything wrong.